We are at the British Motor Museum at Gaydon for a commemoration of aronline.co.uk, the website established by Keith Adams, which is celebrating 20 years since its creation and first appearance online. Probably the highlight of the day was a gathering in one of the conference rooms for a question and answer session with some of the people who were at British Leyland, Austin-Rover, Rover Group, MG Rover at the time. We'll come back to that in part 2, but before then Steve Cropley, the editor of Autocar Magazine, was asked to give an introduction and say a few words about AR Online.
I just want to say something very briefly about the importance of what these guys have got together and AR Online. It is a remarkable resource, I'm sure you know that, but those of us who still need to find accurate facts for stories that we write every day use it all the time, and the thought that Keith and his henchmen have done this just out of the goodness of their own, well, with their own motivation is, I think, remarkable. I wrote down 4 things that I particularly rate both Keith and AR Online for. One is quality. We know how good it is. It's been tested by people who were there. One, obviously, what comes off that is accuracy. You can trust it. The remarkable thing to me, knowing what it takes to put something like this stuff together, is dedication. Imagine the dedication that it's taken to put all those pages together. Amazing. And the last thing I want to talk about was joy. One of the trustees of this place until recently was Stephen Norman, who some of you will have worked with, was the boss of Vauxhall. And he talks about, he's worked for 5 or 6 different companies, and he says that absolutely the best time that he had in his career and the most enjoyable was BL Rover, Austin Rover, etc., because of the culture and the joy of the place. And I think what AR Online manages to do is to inject that joy even into the pages when you're looking up information. So I just want to say congratulations, fantastic effort, 20 years of non-stop achievement, and we look forward to more and better. Good luck to you, Keith.
The day began with a tour of some of the most interesting concepts and prototypes in the annex building of the museum, which has enabled some of these historic cars to be seen by the public for the first time. These cars were really the catalyst for Keith starting the website, so before the tour commenced, I thought it was important to get a few words from the man himself. Keith, founder of aronline.co.uk, how did it come about and what inspired you to do it?
Oh well, what inspired me I think was just lots and lots of visits to this museum. It had all these wonderful prototypes, but no one really knew the stories, so I just came along, wrote the stories, put them online, and built the website from there. It's been a labour of love, I mean, there's a CCV here, for instance. Everyone knew it was a motor show car, but I united the designer of this car again to get the full story of it, Roy Axe, a wonderful friend, now much missed. But he gave me the insight as to why he did it, why it looked the way it did, and the nice staff here opened the doors, got him to sit in it and tell me the story. And I think that's, for me, the most important thing about the website, is getting the involvement of other people, rather than just telling what I know. It's actually getting people involved who are there. That's the most important thing.
And I suppose Roy Axe led you on to other people, did he? Is that how it evolved?
He had quite a good contacts book, yes, for sure. So yes, Steve Harper, people like that, who I've come to know very well over the years.
And I suppose the website got so big you needed an assistant editor at some point, so what happened there?
Well, it was quite funny, yeah. I mean, it was just getting monumental to edit it. So in the end, there was this young chap from Horsham. He'd just bought this £100 Rover, and he was polishing it up and making it work. And I thought, there's something in this guy's writing. So I got in touch, and we got talking. And Mike Humble has been part of the site since then.
Mike Humble and I became friends almost by accident while I was making the Rover story. It was Mike who suggested we make a documentary on the Rover 75, and that ultimately resulted in codename R40.
And had breakfast or something.
That's right, and then we were around the stables, we
went out to this kind of moth-eaten garage with this bloody car in it.
Yeah.
Steve Cropley of Autocar was mentioned by Denis Chick on camera in that documentary. Denis was Communications Director at the Rover Group, and the story he told was about taking Steve out in a pre-production Rover 75. With both of them at AR Online's 20th birthday, what an opportunity to get the pair of them together to ask them about that day back in 1998.
The work was really going on to get the isolation right.
The thing I most remember, I mean, I remember it driving nicely and nice steering and all this, and as you say, the isolation. But it was about driving it along over these suburban bumps, which are always, to this day, are still the way I judge a car by its ride. I just think that's true luxury. If you can drive over a drain hole at 15 miles an hour and you don't hear it, and
absolutely right.
Because so many cars have got, you know, the sort of inertia or the weight of the wheel takes over, and they can't be controlled at fairly high frequency. And this car just glided over it, and it was quiet. I felt extremely optimistic about the whole thing. It was subsequently it was a lovely car, wasn't it? I mean, some versions were better than others, but
and it's a shame it just fell foul of all the change, BMW giving up the business, etc., etc. I personally feel if we go back to that period, what we needed to do as a company was to invest in a medium car. And I know Mr. Peach's reader was very keen to do the Mini, but we should have had a new 2 and 400 series. If we'd have done that, and if we'd have done it off a similar architecture, we would have had a real volume car, class leading at the time, and that could have saved the company. Whereas this was too late, and it was big car, relatively low volume,
high value.
and that's why it high value. And that's why it. The company failed.
But I mean, it did okay. You saw a lot of them around.
It did very well. It did very well through MG Rover's life as well. It went on to be obviously an MG variant and other derivatives. But that's
well, the thing is, some of these big cars. I mean, I came today in a Bentley, and one of the things they're beautiful at body control and you know, surface noise and all the rest. But what they have trouble with is controlling these big heavy wheels at high frequencies. And they always did, and they always will. And this car was in some ways better than some of them.
By built at Longbridge. These are MG Rover cars from Longbridge. Now you can tell the difference because down here, this bottom part of the bumper and the sills are black on a car from Cowley because they took the trouble to mask the sills. And when we went to Longbridge to build the car, wouldn't do that, so it's just all body colour. Everything's body colour. Made it easier.
I see them chose to give just the right amount of BLDNA though.
This seems like the best place to start a tour like this. This is ECV3, and it was launched as a prototype in 1982. And it was here to showcase the talents of the British Leyland Technology engineers, but also to showcase the building next door, Gaydon, which had been opened a year or so before. So all the advanced engineers for the company were based there. And this little box of tricks is really, really fascinating insight into what could have been. So a highly aerodynamic 5-door hatchback. The idea was that, again, might get corrected on this, but drag coefficient was 0.24, which at the time no production car was anywhere near. And underneath the bonnet was a little 3-cylinder engine, a jewel of an engine, and absolutely the Spen King oversaw the development of that. And the idea was that this little 3-cylinder engine could produce all the power of a 4-cylinder but be more efficient in terms of fuel. That engine would eventually go on to become the K-series engine, which sadly never saw the light of day as a 3-cylinder. It was always a 4-cylinder, but the concept was here. This car had 115 mile an hour top speed. You know, any car does that these days, so they say, but back then that was quite a thing. I interviewed Spen King about this car because this was his baby. BL Technology was all about Spen King, getting advanced engineers together, moving the company forward, and Spen said that his biggest regret was that he didn't get these lightweight aluminium cars into production. So I'm going to move you on to another one in a second. But he did say rather fascinatingly when I interviewed him in 2003 that this car did kind of get into production in two ways. The first way was that the engineering concepts of it went on to become the Jaguar way of thinking with their aluminium X350, the XJ. But also he said the nearest production car to this was the Audi A2, lightweight, super efficient, big car, small package, really clever thing. Except he said that the Audi was horrible because you couldn't see out of the A-pillar. This was another thing of Spen's, that he was absolutely besotted by. A-pillars need to be really slim. So, but what happened with this car, it got mothballed, but a lot of the ideas and concepts were then brought into, I'm going to walk you smartly over to this car here, which is the AR6. And I believe that the story of this car was told very capably back in the day, surreptitiously through British Leyland, talking to the journalists at Car Magazine. So Car Magazine regularly scooped the AR6, and all of the concepts from the ECV3 were brought into this. This was basically more representative of how this would look. Now, this car is it's a mule, so you've got a Maestro dashboard in there, Maestro underpinnings. This was more about showing how the car could look to future investors, but the idea was that it was going to have the 3-cylinder and the 4-cylinder, what would become the K series under the bonnet, conventional suspension, fantastic packaging, and it was due to launch in about 1988. So this could have been the car that saved British Leyland. Might not have been. Estimates were that it was going to cost 250 million to get into production. Norman Tebbit and Margaret Thatcher weren't keen on lending that amount of money to the company. But what it did do, when this was finally cancelled in 1987, it focused the engineers onto developing the car in front, the Metro, the mighty Metro. So that received the K-Series engine that this was going to have, and then the wonderful Alex Moulton developed suspension was further refined for that to become the R6 Metro. This mule was cobbled together. I mean, nobody had this level of flush glazing. Audi introduced it in 1982, but that was it's a far more expensive car than this would have been. So yeah, that would have been one of the challenges. I mean, the rear screen here is a beautiful double curved. It's like a concept car. And this one's obviously perspex, it's not glass. So, these were the challenges for the production engineers. That would have been the next step.
You can't all people
Last Montego off the production line. It's a bit of a sad moment because it is the last Montego, and this is a much maligned car. But I'm actually going to get Mike Humble to talk about the Montego because the site wouldn't be the same without Mike. He's been very much my driving force for the last 10 years. And he's also got a bit of a love thing going on with the Montego, which I don't. So I'm going to hand over to Mike.
To be fair, it's a bit of a love-hate thing with the Montego. Is that I love it and I hate it in equal measures. From my personal experience as a trainee mechanic at the time when they were still building these things, they were great. Because they were one of the very few cars where you could earn overtime bonus just by doing a PDI, and you think that's funny, but it's actually true. From the day the car was launched to the day the car ended production, it never met its full potential, and it was never ever really built properly. And it was styled by, I think, Steve, Mr. Cropley, or no, this was about 4 people had to go styling this, didn't they? I think something.
I think the various ends of it.
It was one of the magazines famously said about the Montego was styled by a committee that never actually met in person. Its critics were less kind. But saying that though, it does represent quite an important part of history as far as Austin-Rover and British Leyland is concerned. Because in my, no pun intended, humble opinion, I actually think that the Montego is probably the last hurrah of British Leyland as what lots of people come to know it, i.e. for the fact it never met its potential, the build quality was never particularly brilliant on it. I mean, this is so rare, it's got both its indicators on. I mean, who remembers seeing the indicator lenses actually on these cars when they were more than 18 months old? Other things about them as well. It took the engineers about 4 attempts to get the front wheel bearings to work properly. It took the engineers about 3 or 4 attempts to get the shock absorbers to last more than 18 months. But the clever thing is, though, is that even though it is, in every sense of the word, a boxy square car that was actually designed in the late 1970s, you get a good one of these and they are a really, really good car to drive. What is actually quite clever as well is that because the car had shortcomings when it was coming into production, the engineers overcame a lot of that. For example, the body rigidity of these things is rather like wet cardboard, and yet they still handle really tidy. You'll vouch for that. Even a Montego turbo, you put 150, 160 horsepower through the front wheels with the right set of tyres on them, and for a lofty centre of gravity and a really high ride height, they were a really tidy car to drive. And it makes you wonder how well these could have handled if they were actually rigidly strong. The other thing I love about the Montego as well is when you look in the rear view mirror and you look down the side of the car, is the way that it almost represents the South Downs in Sussex, the way that it's actually true. Anyone who's ever owned one or driven one or spent any time with one will know that. I mean, I used to take these things out on PDIs when they were brand new with trade plates in the windscreen. We're talking a car with less than 12 miles on the clock, and you'd look in the rear view mirrors and you'd think, how the hell are we still getting away with building a car like that? But on the plus side though, there's not much on the market at the time had more interior space than the Montego. It had an absolutely massive boot. If I remember rightly, I think it won 2 design awards from the 2 Design Council awards, or the now defunct Design Council awards. One was for the was it the spare wheel, the sling, for getting
That's the best invention that no other car's got.
Yeah, which they deleted. They did a nice little thing in the boot whereby the spare wheel sat in a well in the floor, and basically what it had 2 miniature seat belts underneath. So you took the little lock thing out, and then you pulled the 2 bits of nylon, and it literally the spare wheel sat up and came up and sat on the edge of the boot. But in true Austin-Rover tradition, when you did that at the same time, it smashed off your rear number plate lights. That's around the front. But we're a bit cruel to them. They sold over 400. I think they sold in the UK anyway. There's over 400,000 of them sold. A well-maintained 16 and 2 litre petrol, and especially the 2 litre Perkins Prima-powered turbo diesels, if they are serviced and looked after, well, you're going to have to service them religiously. If you just drive them and service them properly. This particular one, this last saloon ever made, is a diesel, and I can remember seeing Maestro vans and working on Maestro vans with 150, 200, 250,000 miles on the clock. Amazing. They were absolutely idiot-proof to service. These are an absolute beautiful car to work on. Even like the 1600 1.6, for example, with its non-interference engine, if it does break its timing belt, it doesn't do any damage.
Next one, this car is a subject close to my heart. It's the Triumph SD2. Now, before I came on board with doing AR Online or Austin-Rover.co.uk way back when, in the mists of time, very little was known about this car. There was one picture of it in Jeff Daniels' book BL, The Truth About the Cars, but other than that, there was very little known about this car. And what we know now is mostly thanks to the BMA IHT releasing stuff, but I did scoop a lot of things about this car. I managed to get a full file on this car from, I shouldn't say who it was from, but he was an engineer on the project, and the idea with this one was that we'd got the SD1, launched in July 1976, and it was a world beater. People forget just how good and influential the SD1 was when it was new. It was a very, very special car. one of Spen King's pet projects in terms of simplifying the mechanics, or simplifying the mechanicals of a car, but the user experience was enhanced because it was done in a very clever way. And this was the next step in that program. So the specialist division had kind of the best bits of Triumph, the best bits of Rover Company come together, built this beautiful car, the SD1. And then they created the SD2, which was going to be a couple of years further down the line. And the idea was this was going to replace the Triumph Dolomite. So like the SD1, this was a rear-wheel drive 5-door hatchback. It was going to be powered by a range of engines, from the 1.5 Triumph engine up to the Dolomite Sprint engine. That was going to be fuel injected. It was going to have 130 horsepower. This was going to be a BMW beta before BMW were really crystallized in their 3 Series kind of strategy. This is actually one of several design concepts, but this one is the one that survives today, and the one that seems to have gone through to fruition to be how the SD2 is going to look. And I think that is probably the car's weakest link, because basically this was styled in-house, and the idea was they took the SD1 and they shortened it, so you've kind of got these unhappy heavy pillars here and Citroen style enclosed rear arches, which actually is Citroen, not Triumph. Triumph didn't do this. But from the engineers that I spoke to who worked on this project, it drove like a dream. The handling was, they benchmarked Alfa Romeo, they benchmarked BMW, and this car could beat them all. And the idea was that, this was going to take the specialist division forward, and Triumph was going to become established as a premium player in the mid section of the car market. Sadly, it didn't really happen because of the contraction of British Leyland after the Ryder report. There was a brief plan to take this car and also create a Morris out of it to replace the Marina, so you would have this as the Triumph and then a 3-box version that would be the replacement for the Marina. But after much cost cutting, much soul searching, they just said, we're not going to do this. We're going to develop actually a whole new range of front-wheel drive cars, Maestro, Montego. So this car was put on ice in September '75, and now this is all we have left of it. This and one big dusty box file of mine. But it's a car I've felt like has been with me for the entire life of the website, and even today I still get excited when I see it, and it's kind of one of those missed opportunities. I think if this car had come out, a bit of tweaking on the styling, it was gonna do better than the Dolomite would have done in the late 70s and into the 80s, and we might still have had a premium volume version of the company still going today. To me, it's the biggest tragedy of this that we lost Triumph as early as we did. And yes, we had the Acclaim, but as much as I like the Acclaim, that wasn't what Triumph was. So yeah, this to me is the one of the biggest missed opportunities, the AR6, this. So yeah, this is, for me, it feels like what the site was all about. It was getting these cars and championing them. That in the 70s, it was very fashionable for people to say, British Leyland, they're always on strike, and the engineers build crap cars and design crap cars. And the reality is, they didn't. They were building and designing some amazing world-beating cars, but they just didn't have the money, the management to get these things into production. And I think that's probably a failure of the British car industry at the time.
And that concludes the first part of this fabulous day at the British Motor Museum. Part 2 will feature the question and answer session with the men who were there at the time. So once that is available, I'll link to it at the end of this video and also in the description below. Until then, thank you for watching.